Let's start with a hard, uncomfortable truth. The human brain is wired to reject miracles. It is an evolutionary survival mechanism. We rely on patterns. We rely on the laws of physics. Gravity pulls down, fire burns, and dead men stay dead. That is the absolute, unshakable rule that governs our existence. So imagine for a second that you are standing in Jerusalem in the 1st century. You have just watched a man you loved, a man you followed, be publicly tortured, executed by the state, and sealed inside a rock tomb. You saw the life leave his eyes. You saw the spear pierce his side. The story is over. Now someone runs up to you and tells you he's alive. Not in spirit, not as a ghost, but physically walking, talking, and breathing. Your reaction wouldn't be joy. It wouldn't be relief. It would be skepticism. It would be doubt. We have this caricature in our heads of doubting Thomas, the one bad apple who ruined the perfect faith of the disciples. But that is not the real history. The reality is far more messy and far more human. In the chaotic days following the crucifixion, almost every single one of Jesus' closest followers was paralyzed by doubt. This isn't just a story about one skeptic named Thomas. This is the story of a collective psychological collapse and how a group of terrified, broken fugitives were dragged, kicking and screaming, into believing the impossible. To understand the weight of their doubt, we have to look at the shattering of their identity. Rewind to just a few nights before, the Passover meal. The atmosphere is tense, thick with impending doom. Jesus looks at Simon Peter, the leader, the rock, and tells him, "Tonight you will deny me 3 times." Peter is insulted. He is brimming with that specific kind of adrenaline-fueled loyalty that comes before a fight. He slams his fist on the table. "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And it wasn't just him. The historical accounts tell us all the disciples swore the same oath. They were ready to be revolutionaries. But then came the darkness, the arrest, the chaos. The bravado evaporated the moment the steel of the Roman swords flashed in the torchlight. While Jesus was being interrogated, Peter wasn't fighting. He was hiding in the shadows of the high priest's courtyard, trying to be invisible. And here is where the tragedy becomes tangible. He isn't confronted by a squad of soldiers. He is approached by a servant girl, a person with 0 political power. She just looks at him and says, "You were with him." Panic takes over. The fight-or-flight response kicks in, and Peter chooses flight. "I don't know what you're talking about." A few minutes later, another girl points him out. Again, the denial. "I don't know the man." Finally, a group of bystanders closes in. They hear his accent, the rough, rural dialect of Galilee. It gave him away. He was out of place. Cornered, terrified, Peter breaks completely. He starts cursing, swearing oaths, screaming, "I do not know the man." And then, the sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A rooster crows. The Gospel of Luke adds a detail that is absolutely devastating. Right at that moment, Jesus is being led out, and he locks eyes with Peter. In that split second, Peter's entire self-image, the loyal warrior, the brave leader, is incinerated. He runs out into the night and weeps. Not just tears of sadness, but the bitter, heaving sobs of total failure. This is the emotional state of the disciples when the crucifixion happens. They aren't expecting a resurrection. They are drowning in shame. They are fugitives, huddled in a locked room, waiting for the sound of boots on the pavement, waiting to be arrested next. Their hope didn't just die on the cross. It was buried under a massive stone slab. So when Sunday morning arrives, nobody is counting down the minutes. They are mourning. Then, there is a frantic knocking at the door. It's Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and the other women who had gone to the tomb to embalm the body. They aren't carrying spices anymore. They are carrying a story that sounds like madness. They claim the stone, a massive disc weighing hundreds of pounds, was rolled away. They claim the tomb is empty. They speak of angels, of men in clothes like lightning, asking, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" Now, put yourself in the disciples' shoes. These women are their friends. They are trusted members of their circle. But the text tells us the disciples didn't believe them. In fact, Luke uses a specific Greek medical term here, leros, which translates to idle tales or delirious nonsense. It's the word you would use for the babbling of a feverish patient. They dismissed the testimony. They thought the women were hallucinating from grief. This is a crucial historical detail. If you were inventing a religion in the 1st century, you would never make women the first witnesses, because in that culture, a woman's testimony wasn't considered valid in a court of law. But the Bible records it anyway. It records the disciples' sexism, their skepticism, and their refusal to believe. They were logical men. They knew that when you bury a body, it stays buried. The skepticism continues. 2 other followers are walking 7 miles to a village called Emmaus. They are joined by a stranger who walks with them, eats with them, and breaks bread with them. Suddenly they realize it's Jesus, and he vanishes. They sprint 7 miles back to Jerusalem, bursting into the room with sweat and adrenaline, shouting, "It's true! We saw him!" And even then, Mark's gospel tells us, they did not believe them either. The wall of doubt was too high. The trauma was too deep. They needed more than stories. They needed contact. They remained behind locked doors. The air in that room must have been suffocating, a mix of stale sweat, fear, and confusing arguments. And then, without a door opening, without a lock turning, the atmosphere shifted. He was there, standing right in the middle of them. This is the moment where the human brain snaps. Luke tells us they were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. It's the only logical explanation their minds could grasp. A spirit, an apparition, a collective hallucination. Jesus doesn't shame them for this. He doesn't lecture them on their lack of faith. He goes straight for the empirical evidence. He acts like a forensic scientist presenting proof. "Look at my hands and my feet," he says. "It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones." He forces them to confront the physical reality of the resurrection. But even then, as they are touching him, the text says they still could not believe it because of their joy and amazement. It was too good to be true. So Jesus does something incredibly mundane. He asks, "Do you have anything here to eat?" They hand him a piece of broiled fish, and they watch him eat it. Ghosts don't digest protein. Hallucinations don't leave fish bones on a plate. This was the turning point, the realization that the impossible had actually happened. But there was one empty chair. Thomas wasn't there. When Thomas finally returns, the other 10 swarm him. "We have seen the Lord!" You can imagine the scene, 10 men shouting over each other, frantic with joy, and Thomas just stands there, cold, unmoved. Thomas is often painted as the villain, but he is actually the most relatable person in the room. He is protecting his heart. He saw the crucifixion. He knows the brutality of Roman execution. He isn't going to let himself be swept up in mass hysteria only to be crushed again. He draws a line in the sand. He sets the bar for evidence impossibly high. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Think about the graphic nature of that request. He wants to put his hand inside a wound. He wants visceral, tactile proof of the trauma. He is essentially saying, "I will not believe in life unless I can touch the scars of death." For 8 days, Thomas sits in that room with 10 believers. 8 days of silence. 8 days of being the outsider. And then, the sequel. The doors are locked. Jesus appears again. "Peace be with you." And immediately he locks eyes with Thomas. He doesn't need to be told what Thomas said. He repeats Thomas's own words back to him. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." He invites Thomas to touch the very thing that caused the doubt. He validates the skepticism by offering the proof. And in that moment, the fortress of Thomas's doubt collapses. He doesn't just say, "It's you." He falls to his knees and makes the most profound declaration in the entire narrative. "My Lord and my God." But the story doesn't end with a neat bow. Even later, on a mountain in Galilee, Matthew records that when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. The Greek word here is distazo. It doesn't mean they rejected him. It means they hesitated. They wavered. They were standing on the precipice of a new reality, and their human minds were still trembling from the shock of it all. So what happened to these cowards? What happened to these men who locked doors, denied their leader, and called the resurrection nonsense? Something fundamentally changed them. You don't get from the upper room to the history books without a catalyst. 50 days later, at Pentecost, we find Peter standing in the middle of Jerusalem, the same city where Jesus was killed, surrounded by the same people who called for his death. And he isn't whispering. He is shouting. He proclaims the resurrection with a boldness that borders on insanity. The fear is gone. The doubt is evaporated. These men spent the rest of their lives traveling to the ends of the known world. They didn't get rich. They didn't get famous. They got hunted. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome because he felt unworthy to die like his master. Andrew was crucified in Greece. Thomas, the skeptic, traveled all the way to India, where he was speared to death for his faith. This is the ultimate historical argument. People lie to get out of trouble. People lie to gain power. But people do not willingly die for something they know is a hoax. If they had stolen the body, if they had made it all up, one of them would have cracked. When the whip came down, when the cross was raised, someone would have said, "Stop! It was a lie! We hid the body!" But no one did. They went to their graves claiming they had eaten with him, touched him, and spoken to him. Their initial doubt is actually the strongest proof of their testimony. They weren't gullible fanatics looking for a miracle. They were hardened skeptics who were dragged into belief by evidence they couldn't deny. They didn't believe because they wanted to. They believed because they had to. The reality of the resurrection overwhelmed their doubt. This story teaches us that doubt isn't the enemy of faith. It's part of the process. It's the crucible where a fragile hope is forged into an unshakable conviction. The disciples show us that it is okay to ask for proof. It is okay to wrestle with the impossible. Because on the other side of that wrestling, you might just find a truth worth dying for.